Chapter 2. The Sixth Grader. When Ted got to school at 9 o'clock, his day was almost 3 hours old. As he delivered his newspapers and then munched his donut at Clara's diner, there had been plenty of time to think about what he'd seen as he went riding past the Andersons' house. Ted even asked himself if maybe he hadn't imagined it. But no, he was sure he'd seen a face, a girl's face, and she'd had brown hair that covered one cheek almost down to her chin, and she'd pulled back into the shadows just as he rode past and glanced her way. She hadn't wanted to be seen. As curious as Ted was, there was nothing he could do about it. Not until later. Not until after school. And he had a feeling it was going to be another long day. When the weather got beautiful, every school day lasted forever, especially in room 1. There was an old joke, and it was supposed to be funny. Someone would ask, "Where should we have the school play?" And someone else would say, "I know, let's use room 1. Or a kid would say, "Where can we have the spelling bee?" And another kid would say, "How about room 1? Or the scoutmaster would say, "I wonder where we should hold the big pancake breakfast this year." And a boy would pretend to think real hard and then offer, room 1, maybe? The person asking and the person answering were both in on the joke, because everyone in the town of Plattsford, Nebraska knew that if you didn't count the bathrooms in the small front office, Red Prairie Learning Center was a one-room school. The one and only classroom was room 1. And in that one and only room, there was only one sixth grader, and that was Ted Hammond. To call Red Prairie a one-room school wasn't completely correct, because the building actually had 7 classrooms. As recently as 15 years ago, there had been over 100 children attending in grades kindergarten through 5. Back then, the town even had its own junior high school. But as the local farms and businesses went through year after year of hard times, more and more families had moved away. 8 years earlier, the junior high school had closed, and the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders joined the younger kids at Red Prairie, which meant that some grades had needed to double up in the same classrooms. As the number of students kept dropping, classrooms were shut down, no longer needed. The long fluorescent light bulbs were removed from the ceiling fixtures to be used in other rooms. The heating and ventilation systems were turned off to save money. The custodian stopped sweeping the floors, and if a window in an empty classroom got broken, it was covered with plywood. Finally, only the large room near the front office was kept open, the room that had been used for assemblies and lunch. Room 1. It was a good thing that room 1 was so large. There was enough space in the reading corner for the 8 long bookshelves that had become the school library. There was enough space for 3 computer desks, except only 2 of the computers were working at the moment, and the dial-up internet access was painfully slow. There was even enough space for a couple of 4-square courts near the center of the room, which were put to good use on indoor recess days. Just 2 years ago, Red Prairie Elementary School had been renamed Red Prairie Learning Center, and this year there were only 9 students in room 1. On the younger end, there were 4 4th graders, Lizzie, Hannah, Kevin, and Keith. On the older end, there were 4 8th graders, Josh, Eddie, Carla, and Joan. And smack dab in the middle, there was 1 6th grader. Was the only 12-year-old in town a loner, friendless? Not Ted Hammond. There were 2 other 6th grade boys who lived in Holton, about 20 miles away. They were in his 4-H club, and the meetings were every other week. The 3 guys had gone to the 4-H summer camp in Halsey last year. They weren't neighbors or classmates, but they were good friends just the same. Ted also spent time working side by side with his dad around the farm, and the whole family ate dinner together every night. And delivering the newspapers kept Ted in touch with almost everyone else in town. There wasn't much time left over to feel lonely. True, during the school day, Ted was on his own a lot, and it would have been great to have one good friend. But did he miss having a big gang of kids his age? Not really. Ted's time at school was interesting in its own special way. It was almost restful. Almost boring, too. But only now and then. Red Prairie Learning Center had a total population of 10 people, if you counted the teacher. And of course, you always have to count the teacher. Even though the total number of students was small, Mrs. Mitchell still had a big job with plenty of juggling. A few activities like art and music could include the whole group, but most of the time, the 3 different grade levels needed individual attention. Mrs. Mitchell had to prepare the 8th graders for high school. She had to help the 4th graders with their reading and basic math. And she had to try to keep her 1 6th grader from just sitting in a corner with a book all day. Because that's what happened if the teacher didn't keep Ted focused on his math and social studies and language arts and science. Even during outdoor recess, Ted sometimes made up an excuse to go back into the room, and Mrs. Mitchell would find him 30 minutes later, curled up in the reading corner with The Mystery of the Bloody Shoe, or The Case of the Empty Coffin, or The Detective's Diary. Somewhere in the middle of 3rd grade, Ted had gotten hooked on mysteries. After he'd read all the ones at the school, he moved on to the mysteries in the children's collection at the town library. And after he'd read all those, he asked Mrs. Coughlin, the librarian, for more. So she taught Ted how to connect with the interlibrary loan programs over the internet. Suddenly, Ted's library was 100 times bigger than the one on Main Street, and that's why a fresh batch of books arrived every 10 days. Mrs. Coughlin kept them behind her desk on a shelf marked "Reserved for Ted Hammond." He read 2 or 3 mysteries a week, but he didn't just read them, he solved them. Or at least he tried. Ted had developed his own mystery-solving system. When he got to the page at the exact middle of a mystery book, he stopped reading and picked up his pencil. First, he wrote down the names of all the characters. He carefully listed all the facts he knew so far. Then he tried to think of every possible way the case might end up. Finally, after he'd solved the mystery in his own mind, Ted zoomed through the second half of the book to see how the author solved it. And 8 times out of 10, Ted got it right. Not bad for a 12-year-old detective. But in the spring of his 6th grade year, the mysteries of real life were starting to demand Ted's attention. For example, just a few days ago at the dinner table, his dad had said, "How the heck am I supposed to keep this farm if the price of beef keeps dropping and the price of fuel keeps going up? It's a mystery to me." Then there was the mystery of how Red Prairie Learning Center was going to stay open next year after all the 8th graders left. That was a big mystery, and everyone in town wanted to solve it because really, it was a matter of life and death. Out on the Great Plains in western Nebraska, people understand that if the school dies, the town dies too. Back in April, Ted had heard talk at Clara's Diner one morning about a young family that wanted to buy a house on Hutchins Street, the old Chalmers place. The rumor was that they had 4 kids, ranging from 2nd grade up to 7th. A week later, word filtered back that they'd moved to Wheaton instead, 38 miles west. So the survival of the school continued to be a matter of great suspense. But on this particular Tuesday morning in May, the mystery that had Ted's full attention was that face. The one he'd seen at the Andersons' house. By morning recess, Ted had worked out 3 possible explanations for that face in the window. By lunchtime, his list had grown to 7 different solutions, but by 2:30 he had crossed out 3, including the idea that he might have seen a ghost. Ted was a practical, no-nonsense detective, and he certainly didn't believe in ghosts. That was a real girl he'd seen, so there had to be a real explanation. As the school day ended, Ted thought about telling Mrs. Mitchell. Then he thought about riding his bike over to the town hall and telling Deputy Sheriff Linwood. And maybe that would have been the smartest and the safest thing to do. But Ted had read a lot of mysteries. The police and bossy grown-ups, they always seemed to get in the way of good detective work. No way was Ted going to let a bunch of other people spoil his investigation. But he wasn't going to be stupid about it either. If the situation looked like it might be dangerous even a little bit, then he'd tell everyone else right away. But for now, this was his mystery, and Ted wanted to solve it on his own.